some of our players might have noticed, our expansions just keep getting bigger. And to try to address that, we're trying to release them more frequently and trying to keep them more focused every time we release an expansion. And even in doing so, I feel like this expansion is going to be the biggest so far. And there's multiple reasons for that. Both it is the culmination of programming efforts that have been ongoing for the last 2 years, which involve upgrading our graphics engine, Trinity, to a new architecture. And that work is still ongoing, and we are going to continue that work even past this expansion. But what you're seeing in this first expansion is the first public display of what it can do. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But as well, we're also releasing a lot of new features in the game, loads of more content. We've also been focusing on fixing defects and bugs in the game, and so we hope our players are going to appreciate that. But speaking of the graphics part of it, Trinity part, basically what's happening is that we want a new foundation for our graphics so that CCP as a company has a more modern foundation to build on for the next years. The graphics hardware has been changing quite drastically in the last few years, and it's now up to a level that's really impressive and allowing us to do really good graphics effects in real time. And this is especially important in an MMO because we can have an unforeseen number of players on the screen at any one time. So it's very important for us when we release a new graphical feature that it can actually scale. Because, as I said, we really don't know at what scale this feature will be used eventually. It all depends on the players and how many there are in one place and what they're doing. And this even goes back to the early days of EVE. Even before EVE launched, there were certain effects that were put into the game that simply didn't scale and are still not yet in the game. As an example of that are nice fire and smoke effects, which were in our early builds but then got cut. And we have a plan to put that in. But really what I want to talk about here is what the focus is of this expansion. Just to clear the air, because of course, I mean, when you talk about releasing a new graphics engine, there's a lot of expectations, and people start thinking, okay, what's it going to be? Is it all shiny and new? Is everything changed? So what I want to stress here is that we have a focus in this expansion for our graphics update, and it's beautiful ships. And it's really what we're driving on in all the programming work that we're doing these days, and also in the art department. So basically, we're putting all the focus on the ships, stations, and stargates. We're basically upgrading those. We're both putting in new models and new textures and new graphical effects. And there's a lot of programming that is necessary to make this all manifest itself in the way that we want to see it. You know, people have mentioned self-shadowing. There's a lot of work that we had to do to get that right and get that looking good. And new shader effects so we can produce better looking metals and glass and things like that. And this is all programming that we've had to do, specifically to make these three things, ships, stations, and stargates, look really good. So I just wanted to point out that, you know, when people see these, those are the things you're going to notice. And we, however, plan then to upgrade the other parts of the game in upcoming expansions. What we're looking at as the focus of the expansion beyond this is actually the effects. And that's when you will see upgrades to our effect system, the visuals, more effects, and hopefully you'll see nice looking fire and smoke, just to mention an example. This will also allow you to see more full frame effects, whatever they should be. You know, if you would like to see a special effect for when your screen is scrambled, for instance, we now have an architecture in place to do that. For this release, we're doing very limited things with full screen effects, just because we're pressed for time, and also because we want to release this, get it out, and then continue working on it, instead of holding it back for a long time and say, wait, we're not going to put it out until everything is done. So in this release, we're putting out HDR, high dynamic range rendering, and we're putting in some bloom and some glow effects and things like that. But nothing really spectacular there, just nice looking things. Our goal is then to dive deeper into this in the release beyond that. Another thing that's been, I think, a proud tradition for us here at CCP is that we have really evolved the look of EVE throughout the years. if you could find an old build of Eve and have a way to run it and look at it, which you can't because there's no server that you can actually connect to. But if you could, and then you would notice that the graphics have actually improved throughout the years. Those improvements, though, have all been done through clever artwork. Our artists getting more familiar with the tools and thus being able to make better use of what they had in terms of resources.